Welcome back to this episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm here with my esteemed colleagues, Leb Tannenbaum and Patsy Feeman. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Here.
Yeah, good to have you. I'm excited today. And we're excited to bring to you, our listener, we have a special guest today. So I want to introduce Mark Williams. Mark is currently CEO of Brokers International. Brokers International is a major insurance brokerage based in Des Moines, helping agency partners and financial professionals build their businesses and better serve their customers through innovative products, marketing, compliance, and operational support. Now, in addition to being a full-time CEO, Mark himself is a proud husband and father, a thought leader, a keynote speaker on topics of leadership and sales and marketing, and the author of Lead, Don't Manage, 12 Lessons in Creating a Leadership Culture Based on Core Values. Mark, welcome to the Frustrated CEO.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Super excited.
Yes, well, us too. Just based on conversations we've had, I think that today's going to be a fantastic episode. So now, quick note to you, the listener. So while Mark is here to talk about what frustrates him as a CEO, we will have the opportunity for sure to dig into specific things he and his team at Brokers International have done to alleviate those frustrations. But I think more importantly, we're going to try to talk about how he and his team arrived at some of those solutions to hopefully give you a blueprint to do the same wherever you are. So let's go ahead and dive in. Mark, one thing that we know about you, you are passionate about listening to the voice of the customer, using that to focus on where do you explore new opportunities? How do you take calculated risks to grow the business, improve sales and services? How frustrating has it been trying to hear the voice of the customer during the past year?
Great question. So I do believe that every business needs a routine system or formula for capturing the voice of the customer. Ours is through our telephonic marketers, people on the phones that literally discuss cases every single day with the over 5,000 financial professionals that do business with us. COVID allowed us to continue having those conversations, but truly got the voice of frustration from our own customers. Financial services professionals rely on probably 85 to 90% face-to-face appointments and interviews. So they take the consumer's needs and wants and aspirations, convert that into questions for us, and we determine solutions or help the advisor determine solutions for their customers. Since our customer, the financial professional, couldn't speak with their customer because they couldn't meet face-to-face, there was a lot of frustration on their part, which turned into frustration on our part. We also had just the formal communication that we normally would speak with our financial professionals with was really flipped upside down. We started using tools such as Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams. A lot of our field force wasn't used to using those electronic methods to have conversations with. So capturing the voice of their consumer, capturing the voice of our consumer just got very difficult and very clunky throughout the last, I would probably say 12 to 18 months. We're now into a rhythm where we're used to it, and we got some easier ways to collect that information, but it did cause quite a bit of confusion and frustration.
And that was at a time when the market was tanking, right? I mean, in the beginning of COVID, there were big spiky drops in the market. And I would imagine that's the financial advisors that I know, a lot of them were nervous, didn't know where things were going. And so just staying in touch with them and supporting them through that process.
Yeah, I think the last 12 or 18 months has really, it's shined a lot of light on the financial services industry. Specifically, we've seen people furloughed from work or out of work, people getting sick, not being able to work. Unfortunately, the death toll, and we were watching that almost on a daily basis. And so for a huge portion of the population, it actually was a spark for the financial services business. It was a reminder almost on a daily basis that maybe I do need to do some planning. And actually, I am pretty proud of the financial professionals that we do business with, because it really provided an opportunity to reach out to their customers in a new way, much like a Zoom call, right? They could still get in touch with the customer, and more importantly, ease some concerns of those customers that they're still there for them and they can still help build a plan even in the worst of times. So there was a little bit of a shining light, which actually eased a lot of the frustration on everyone's part over time.
Oh, that's good. What was the solution for training? I mean, how did you get a diverse group of people working on 3 or 4 different platforms, continuing to do great business and work as hard as they did to keep those relationships alive?
Great question. So the average age of a financial professional that does business with Brokers International is 59 to 60. So generally speaking, a little more seasoned professional. Oftentimes technology is a little bit more of a challenge for that group, or at least the group that works with us. So the first thing we did, Leb, was to provide tools that at no cost to them. So if you were doing business with us, the first thing we did was we provided a platform for them to communicate with their customers at no cost. We then set up almost immediately training for that tool. So what we would normally be talking about are financial solutions for their customers. We were actually like tech support for a little while, providing a very quick tutorial on how to log into an electronic call, even some of the tips and tricks about, people can see you now, so you have to dress appropriately. Your background should be appropriate. Maybe you want to silence your phones and make sure your dog isn't near the window to watch the mailman come by, things like that. And really taught them, number one, how to use it from their mobile device, taught them how to use it from their desktop device, and made sure they were comfortable before they reached out to their consumers. So we actually set up training free of charge for anyone that was already doing business with us. And that helped bridge the gap. And actually, I think endeared our customers to us.
Wow. I mean, that's quite an achievement. You just threw me for a loop talking about mobile or your laptop in your, nicely appointed office. I'm sure you have some stories around that. How did that go? I mean, that's a pretty big switch when you're on your phone compared to.
It is a very big switch. And unfortunately, I have even learned how to take a Zoom call while driving, which I'm not recommending, and I don't advocate that. But it's the tools that we have access to today provide a world of flexibility for people that use them appropriately. I once learned that when you run a business, you want as many avenues to that business that a customer can have, right? So you have the front door, you have the telephone, you have email. This provides one more avenue. So as a consumer, if I can reach your goods and services by 5 or 6 different doors to get in, that's fantastic. So our lessons for our producers were, this is one more avenue. People can now contact you by text. They can contact you by email. They can contact you now visually. So it is just one more door to your business. And that's better for everyone. And actually, it's been embraced quite well.
Now, okay, so talk about the new visual communication. In the past, a lot of that was by phone, and you talked about dress code. What was the adjustment there?
Yeah, great question. So internally at Brokers International, because we work with financial professionals nationwide, we aren't really retail. We don't have a lot of people that come, consumers that come to our office. So we made a decision a few years ago, specifically around our culture, to be casually dressed in the office. That works great when 100% of the time you are on the phone. The minute you're now face-to-face with a customer, and our customers, again, across the country, we're now face-to-face visually, my expectation of my staff was to dress a little more professionally. So wearing jeans and a t-shirt might not go quite as well now that we're face-to-face. And so it did change a little bit of our culture, at least from the waist up. We wanted people to have a collared shirt. Again, we're more of a casual atmosphere, but the way you look, as everyone knows, is often, we often jump to conclusions based on the way we dress. And so for me, it was important that the culture still was somewhat professional, even when we're on a call. So it did change the culture a little bit. It did change expectation of our employees. I think they understood it. But back to one of the comments I made earlier, we also made sure that everyone had a background that displayed the company name. Relatively easy to do, but things you don't think about when you first are getting into the medium. And then you realize, wait, this is an opportunity for us to still advertise our name, You can represent the company in a way you want to be represented, right? The dress code or a collared shirt or lack of a collared shirt. So those are the things that took us time kind of to get used to and kind of create out of what was happening around us. In the end, I think if you were to ask our employees, would they prefer maybe not to be seen sometimes? Probably the answer is yes. But in general, if you can't be face-to-face, I think this is this medium that we're now introduced to. This is the second best way to go about it. So in the long run, I think it's been very positive for our business.
So I'm curious what the long-term impact is on, you've now introduced this face-to-face medium. When COVID is over, fast forward, you're back into the office. Do you anticipate a lot of those conversations going back to the phone, or is this, would that feel like a step backward, losing that face-to-face that you've introduced?
Great question. I think we will pick up more telephonically, but I don't think we're ever going to lose this medium. Again, I think this is a fantastic substitute when I can't sit in your living room.
Yeah.
It also opens up a lot more opportunities. In our business, since people deal with financial, their financial planning and their long-term plans, what if you're a snowbird and you spend 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months in another location? Well, your financial professional now can still meet with you, can still see you face to face. We can still set an appointment, and now I don't actually have to be in your home. So I would submit that I think that's a huge positive, not only for the consumer, because now it's just another way that they can meet someone and get products and services, but it's also another avenue for that financial professional to use. So even if outside of my world, in my own personal life, now I can, if I can't make it to the doctor, I can still see my doctor. I may be able to possibly show him something on my arm or a scratch or some rash or something crazy that's happening to me, right? So I think it's opening up that. My wife has done, she has purchased clothing where you can actually watch someone put on something, right? See how something looks as opposed to a 3D image. So I don't think this is going to go away. I think it's one more avenue or one more door to a business that people should embrace. And I think we're just going to see more of it. I can envision the day of looking at my Apple Watch and FaceTiming something on my watch while I'm sitting somewhere else. I think it's just a positive, quite frankly.
Wow. So that spins off another question. Oh, go ahead, Patsy.
Well, you mentioned, I think Patrick mentioned coming back into the office and also having Zoom or more options for not having to get face-to-face. What are you seeing in terms of people returning to the office and the kind of the people having a wider choice of options or not?
Yeah, great question. So this one we have struggled with. So, and I'll also add, COVID was a new frustration for many people in my position simply because there's no playbook, right? This was unprecedented for almost everyone. So deciding what's the best thing for the business, what's the best thing for my employees, what's the best thing for our consumers. There wasn't a guide to look up anything. So returning to work is a great example. We have about 125 employees at Brokers International. And as everyone can imagine, out of 125 employees, you have feelings about masks or no masks, who should wear them and when. Is this really a problem, or is this just media hype? And how do we keep everyone safe? And then you have the legal aspects of if an employee comes back to work and gets sick at work. So there's so many variables. So returning back to the office has been something that we have been heavily challenged with. How do we bring people back in? And I don't mind sharing, currently we are working on a volunteer basis. So those employees that wanted to come to the office that felt for whatever reason they didn't want to work in their own homes, they could come to the office. We set up safety protocols as far as cleaning and wearing masks when not at your workstation. Those things had to be adhered to. But bringing everyone back to the office is and still is a very big decision. We're basing that decision on several things. First, we're paying attention to the vaccination rates, how many people are getting vaccinated. We're paying attention to those that have had COVID or have had COVID within their homes. We also took into consideration school. Are their kids, our employees' kids at home? Are they in school or at home? What are their plans for daycare and things like that we had to consider? Because asking people to come back when their younger age kids were at home, not at school, raised an issue. So all of those things. As well, we did not have a telecommuting policy. 124 out of 125 of our employees were based here in our home office. We didn't allow any kind of telecommuting policy. And the world has changed rapidly in the last 12 months to being very acceptable to more flexibility and more flexible work arrangements. We are actually, starting June 1, we are bringing back our employees slowly by department. The decision was made, number one, we wanted to provide everyone the opportunity to be vaccinated. And we actually had a vaccination day at our office. So we gave everyone the opportunity who wanted to become vaccinated. We chose June 1 based on, again, the ability to be vaccinated, the ability to, schools are now either open and or they're going into their summertime. So our employees would have had to deal with summertime and kids at home anyway. It feels like the world is opening up a tiny bit depending on where you're located in the country. And so we used that as a gauge. And then we used, of course, city, state, and federal, I'll call it openness guidelines for lack of a better term, or their COVID openness. And so we looked at all of that and determined June 1 would be the right time. But we also are introducing a telecommuting policy, Patsy, to answer your question.
Right.
We believe, and we are actually feeling it here in Des Moines, there are 2 departments that, quite frankly, have changed over the last 12 months in the IT space and the marketing space specifically. There are many roles that can function remotely. And we're finding it seeping in to the hiring process, right? So our people are being called by recruiters saying, well, if your company doesn't have flexibility or work from home arrangements, here's 10 other companies that are hiring that would love to do so.
Fascinating.
So we are finding now it is becoming a competitive advantage to offer flexibility. For those that are not, it could be a disadvantage, specifically in the roles that I mentioned here in Des Moines, but I think you're going to see that nationwide. I think you're going to see several, at least specific roles, and if not more, offering more flexibility to as many people or as many employees as you can. And that is, going along with the frustrated CEO, that has its own frustrations. I'm one of those that believes that sometimes we're better together. And I struggle internally, my own frustration of, is this me just being old school and not being the new kind of younger, flexible? I was kind of raised that, you go to the office, you get work done at the office. And for me personally, it's very difficult for me to stay motivated at home. I like to be in the office. I like to be around people. I like to see our employees and spend time with them. And I feel that shoulder taps are important. And we call shoulder taps, you're doing something and someone comes up and asks you a question, that becomes more difficult at home. But I'm willing to shed what I'll call my old school thinking. We are certainly going to give it a try because I think it's important to, number one, provide the flexibility. We have proven we can work remotely and we've been doing it for the last, almost 15, 16 months. So we know we can be efficient. We know we can work effectively, but it does require a lot of effort and a lot of work to keep that communication and that feeling of togetherness. So it's a great question, Patsy, and it is, it's a huge amount of frustration because once again, there is no roadmap. We're kind of flying by we're just flying.
So as a follow-up curious question, it sounds like you had a group of people that have been addressing all of these different issues. What has been for no playbook and more changes and that are coming you at a rapid rate? Great
question. So immediately when we knew back in March of 2020 that this was looking like we were sending our employees home, we created a COVID committee. And we took representatives from each department, 1 or 2, along with my C-level staff, the folks that report to me. And we created a committee that would include HR concerns, productivity, so IT concerns, right? We had to make sure that people had the equipment to work from home and relatively quickly. That raised all kinds of issues of what if people don't have internet at home and what if they don't have printers or monitors? And so we scrambled to make sure that everyone could work from home. And then once again, back to the voice of the customer. I believe that my employees at Brokers International are part of my customer base. So it was very important for me to hear how they were feeling about it. What did they need to work from home successfully? They're nervous, they're scared, exactly what I'm feeling. So we wanted to make sure we had a committee that could provide the voice of that customer, our employees.
Cool.
So we met on a weekly basis. They in turn met with their teams on a weekly basis. And we had topics of conversation every week: productivity concerns, IT concerns. Are we delivering the service level that our customers are used to? So once a week we met and we created actually COVID metrics, which would be different than at home, right? How many calls are being answered in what time frame? Are we cascading the right information to everyone at the right time?
Cool.
Are we still meeting as teams every week? Are my departments meeting as teams, and are they progressing the initiatives that we have in place? Are they still working on the initiatives that we have to move the company forward? So to answer your question directly, we did create a committee almost immediately, and that committee still holds true today. We shifted it a little bit to add a little bit more about the culture to it. But that committee still stands today, and we are still meeting almost on a regular basis with respect to COVID and everything else. So hopefully that answers that question, Patsy.
That's terrific.
So Mark, I want to ask, because your book is Lead, Don't Manage. So how did you, talk about your team and how do you engage your executive team to drive that vision down into the organization? And you could even using that example or another one.
Sure. So I'm one, for good or for bad, that I am much more of a lead by consensus than a lead by dictatorship. Very rarely is it, I think we need to do this and we're all going to do this, and because Mark says so. A little bit of it's just validation for me, probably, that when we have a topic such as bringing people back in the office, I had my own thoughts on that. I wanted to make sure that my team had, number one, the opportunity to voice their opinion. It's important to me that I hear opposing views. I don't need everyone to agree with me. I actually want people to disagree so I can hear the opposite side. And I changed my mind actually quite frequently throughout the year. Pleasantly surprised at how my team would come together and voice an altering or differing opinion of mine that actually, in some aspects, I may not have thought of things in a certain way. I may have not, my kids aren't young anymore, so I don't have the perspective of a young parent. I don't have no daycare issues. So to hear certain, for me to think in a certain framework, it allowed me to get an opposing view and rethink some of my things. But to answer your question directly, we still made some decisions by consensus, but there were some things quite more often than not that I just had to make a decision. And oftentimes the team would say, we really don't know what to do here. We haven't been in this situation. Let's give it a shot. My dad used to say, you miss all the balls you don't swing at, right? So you just take a swing, and my team knows, listen, we have to go down a path, and if we have to call an audible and change what we're doing, we're going to change what we're doing, but you've got to make a decision. A side story, my dad, when I was learning to drive, and which was just crazy, me and my dad, both very loud, and you can imagine in a car learning to drive stick shift. He used to teach me that when you pull out into an intersection to make a turn, you either go or you don't, because you're going to get a rear end full of fender if you don't. So make a decision and go with that decision. And worst case, you alter that decision when it's over. So there were many times where we all came to a consensus that we didn't know. Let's go left. We decided to go left, and worst case, we turn around and go right. And we've done that quite a bit. And it's, I would say, probably with a 75 to 80% success rate. So, so not too bad.
So Mark, it sounds like some of this along the way had to be stressful. And, what can you say about how you keep your, I mean, you look fantastic today. You're healthy, you're vital, you're energetic. Maybe you're always energetic, but how do you manage your health? How do you manage the health of, your team? So that team is extremely important. They touch all the rest of the organization, and then the organization as a whole, because, organizational health is relates to culture, which relates to performance. And
Okay.
here we are, change after change, no playbook, and you're the CEO of the company.
You bet. So first of all, thank you for the nice compliments. Crazy enough, I've had 3 surgeries in the past 18 months. So I use this downtime to get stuff fixed. Rotator cuff, my back, you name it. But in general, I will tell you, work-life balance is very important to me. I'm a family guy. I have 2 boys. Things happen. Just things happen. And it's important for me and the culture of our organization to understand that life happens outside of our 4 walls. And as human beings and people that manage people, you have to have some flexibility every single day. So that's the first thing. We are very compassionate company. So Leb, if you worked for me and there was a situation where, oh my gosh, I have to go home, I have to take care of my mom. Great, go. We'll worry about the PTO and everything else later. That'll, you can't replace your family. So we have that overriding attitude, which I think is appreciated. Specifically, we did several things to, number one, just keep it lighthearted. We, first I'll talk personally. Personally, I'm a walker. I love to walk every day. I found myself when I was working at home, walking 2 or 3 times a day, right? So in the middle of the afternoon, I would get up, take a break. I was working from my living room, actually, my dining room and my living room. So just getting out of the house and, walking for 10 or 15 minutes in the fresh air. I even do that at the office. I'll go for a walk or 2 a day, just to clear my mind, not even to talk on the phone, just literally to be outside and just a breath of fresh air, so to speak, literally and figuratively.
Right.
We created, for example, we did a happy hour one evening where people could give cocktail recipes and we would all make cocktails at home. We did a breakfast one morning. Every month I do a coffee hour with Mark, where it's an open Zoom meeting where people can just jump on and we don't have to talk about work. We can just, just talk and chatter and what's new in the world. So we attempted to do lighthearted activities almost every month to break the monotony and make sure that we're still together and just laugh at ourselves, which we do in the office, and we didn't have that opportunity. Making sure, making sure that people knew that if they had concerns, they could call into the company. We provide 6 or 7 different ways to communicate questions throughout the company. So we have an Ask BI website, so any employee can just send an email with any question. We have phone numbers. We have the Hour with Me. So we do provide a lot of avenues for employees to express their opinions and their concerns, both anonymously and the ability to sign your name to it. We found both was important. So I hope I answered your question by, we just tried to make it as fun as possible, realizing that it's a very difficult time and frustrating time to make sure that people still feel connected.
Yeah, no, you did. That's excellent. It does raise another question for me. Some of this, if you look at March of 2020, there were a lot of political things happening.
Yep.
There was the nervousness and the scariness of the pandemic, right? There are people who were able to keep a job and people who weren't able to keep a job. And then, this whole shift of, I can't see you, I can't, if you're extroverted, it's like, oh, this is horrible. If you're introverted, maybe
it's great.
That's ideal. Okay, I get to work at home, it's quiet, whatever. Anything about that where you had to deal with something that maybe was surprising or, even?
There were 2 or 3 instances that stand out specifically. So okay. Interestingly enough, we had several employees that voiced their opinion. They were very adverse to wearing a mask. To the point of ethically, morally, this was their line in the sand, right? They felt this was an infringement on personal rights. It's not my place to judge that. It's my place to keep as many of my employees safe and feeling secure. That's one of those situations that, although that thinking may be different from mine, it's not any less valid than my thinking, right? And so we had to take into account our employees that felt that way. We attempted to do an all company meeting several months ago where we brought people into a location. Many of our employees expressed a huge concern with having to gather, even though we had we had 6 feet apart and we had people at tables with masks, and there was still that concern. So we really had to be a little bit more flexible than we were used to, including myself. I had to be a lot more flexible with our employees because people are scared and they are nervous. And this was a very specific reaction to something. And again, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. There are rules for the company that I wanted to live by, but there were some circumstances that were very different that I had not had before in my career. Someone literally saying, well, if you're going to require masks to come back to the office, I may not come back. I've never had that situation. And what happens when it's a superstar employee, right? That you don't want to lose, but that's their feeling. So making sure that people's voices are heard. We communicate, people use the word transparency a lot. I am very transparent in even my own thoughts about things. Again, not saying I'm right, but I have my own opinions of the way things should be done. And I think number one, it's important for employees to feel like they're heard. They need the opportunity to voice their opinion. And they need to know that the company heard them. So more importantly, we got your thoughts, but more importantly, this is why we're doing what we're doing. We provided a lot of context. And in my opinion, you may not like my decision, but you may understand it. One of my best friends in the world thinks very differently than I do on several social topics. He's not wrong. I'm not wrong. They're both valid opinions. But at the end of the day, certain things have to get done. So it was important for me to express, to number one, listen to our employees, but more importantly, share them the thought process behind some of our rationale for doing things. And again, I'll leave it up to them whether they like it or not. There are certain things that they don't get a choice, but at least they understood the rationale as to why we were doing it. And to me, that was important.
Yep.
Great.
Mark, earlier you talked about, you kind of gave the demographic of your customer. Talk about the demographic of the industry, the industry that you are in, as well as the demographic in Des Moines, Iowa, and how that has challenged you as a company.
Yeah, great, really good point. So obviously, the world today is very sensitive to diversity and inclusion, and we see it in the news, and we see it in protesting, and regardless of where you fit in that, diversity and inclusion is really important, right? It's a topic that that raises a lot of opinions with a lot of people. Number one, I'll equate it to food, although it's two different worlds, but I'm a foodie. I love to taste food, and I love to taste food from everywhere, and I'll try anything, anytime. And I enjoy that because it gives you a flavor, literally a flavor for something that you might not have had. I find that true with diversity and inclusion, especially with people that I would consider my friends or acquaintances. If I go to a book club, which I used to, I do want to hear from the way people perceive things from their backgrounds or the way they grew up, and they'll read something differently than mine. I feel the same way at work. The challenge that we have, especially in the industry, and I'm glad you mentioned the location that we're in a male-dominated industry. I'm not saying that's good or bad. That just is. That's the fact that we're in. And don't quote me on the stats here, but 70 to 80% of financial service professionals are men. Most of them are older, and the majority of them are white male, older male. We're seeing a huge amount of opportunity and inroads, not only by gender, but by race. Traditionally, not a very big African-American community in the financial services business, not a very big population of women financial services professionals, but we're seeing that change slowly, which number one, I'm thrilled at. And because it provides us, again, another avenue and perspective to look at that might be different from our own. But it is a challenge. It's a challenge recruiting new financial professionals into the business. So that's a challenge. Getting people to understand that this is an opportunity for everyone, and there isn't a mold that you need to fit. But that leads me to Des Moines. I'm relatively new to Iowa. I've been here for about 6 years, but this city has a very, very low diversity rate, right? It's just, there are not a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's not a lot of diversity in the population here. So when, and I'll give you a great example. I took a picture of my leadership team about 1.5 years ago at a retreat, and we are 8 people with 1 female representative on my team. I posted that on LinkedIn, and one of the comments from the public was, wow, Mark, you can do better than just 1 female on your team.
Mm.
I agree, but I don't have a very large pool to choose from. Much like our workforce, we have 125 employees. 2 of them identify themselves as people of color. We actually have to make a concerted effort to try and recruit outside of our normal demographic, because the city itself has a very small minority rate. That's not me doing that. That's the situation in which we built our company in the location. So it takes a little bit of extra time. It does take a little bit of extra monetary thinking. You have to reach out to African-American organizations, maybe schools to help recruit from. It does take some extra planning. It is a frustration of mine, so fair enough for the podcast. I'd love to have a great diverse workforce. I'm not in New York City. I'm not in Chicago. I'm not in Atlanta. I'm not in LA. I'm in the Midwest in a very, very, very tight community, which doesn't have a lot of diversity. So yes, it is a challenge. It's a frustration, but I believe, like everything else, there's solutions to it. It just takes some extra thinking. And so we have made it our priority to reach out to a little bit more diverse ways of recruiting, right? And again, I'll go back to alumni associations, schools, civic organizations. There are ways to tap into the diverse culture. It does just take a little extra planning and time. But it is a frustration. Great question.
Mark, I'm thinking of, in this topic, do you have a handle on how you get the right people in the right seat, and what competencies in your industry, make someone successful? Because I'm sure you have some shining stars, and I'm just really interested in what that might be and how frustrating it might be to get those right people outside of just the diversity conversation.
You bet. Really good question. So I'll describe the process for us, and I'm glad you used the terminology "right person, right seat." We run on an operating system called Traction, which was written by a gentleman by the name of Gino Wickman, who uses that terminology. And so the process that we go through when we need to fill a position, the first thing we do, imagine a sticky note, and someone comes to me and says, hey, we need a new business processor. Great. What are we going to hold that position accountable to do? And so we write down the 5 to 7 things we will hold that position accountable for. So ultimately, what am I paying you to do? You list the 5 to 7 with the bottom. At the bottom, it says other duties as assigned, right? So that's to every job description. So now I know I'm gonna pay for these 5 or 7 accountabilities. In order to accomplish those 5 to 7 tasks on a regular basis, what kind of background does someone need to fill it? And that's how we fill the job description. I need someone that knows how to type. I need someone that has good verbal skills or good communication skills. For this role, I need someone who is detail oriented, that can work with multiple screens open and maybe have these backgrounds in these computer systems. So we'll put that out in a sheet, and that becomes our job description. Now, I'm a little bit different than most in that, depending on the role, I'm also a believer that I don't need college educated all the time. So for example, in our finance team, I might want people with a finance background or degrees in accounting, for example, but my salespeople, maybe not. Maybe for my sales department, I might not even need a college degree. I need to see someone that's got no fear of rejection, right? So someone that doesn't mind hitting the phones, maybe someone that's super extrovert and doesn't get down or is self-motivated. That type of person might not fit the mold in IT. They might not fit the mold for finance or or operations, but they might be a great salesperson. So again, back to the role. What are the accountabilities I need filled? And nowhere there does it say a college education for a good salesman. I need someone who's good with people. So for us, it all comes back to that process of what's the seat I'm trying to fill? Is it the right seat? And what is the perfect candidate for that role look like? And where then next question, Leb, specifically is where could we find them?
Right.
And sometimes it's poaching from competitors. Sometimes it's I went to a store, I had a great salesperson wait on me, and I literally say, how'd you like to work for us? Right, things like that. And we have hired that way as well. So the frustration in that process, I think for some people is I don't want a formula that fits for everyone, because I think you lose. I think if you were to say that everyone has to have a college education and everyone should have 4 years of experience and everyone should, you're going to lose out on candidates that don't fit the mold, but might be rock stars. Now, the flip is also true. I'm not sure I could hire someone to be my CFO without having some formal financial background and education, right? So I think it works in both ways, and you have to be very careful with that. But I think our process, and I'm a big believer in process, if you follow the process, it leads you to create that new mold of what you're looking for, and it doesn't have to fit the parameters of every job. So I'm actually quite pleased to see in the United States anyway, and in the job market, there is a lot more flexibility, not only in how you work, but who you're looking at to do the work. There are many, many different avenues we could talk about. Felons, for example, right? You go back 20 years, no one would hire a felon. Today, that's a lot looser. What was your felony for? And could you still fit in our organization if you have the skill set? Right now, that might be scary for some people, but for some people, it's a huge opportunity. People with disabilities. There are many roles, even at our company, that people that are born with disabilities could fill our roles fantastically well. And even now, working remotely, if it's successful, it's one of the things I'm excited about the most. We have the ability to expand who could work for us, because the parameters of getting to the office and housing that person now can be vastly different.
Nice.
So I don't have to, although we have the ability to have wheelchair people here, people in a wheelchair here, it might be easier for some of them to work from home. And this opens up a much broader range of possible candidates, the new world. So that openness to doing something different could lead to something very different. But yeah, for sure, oftentimes a frustration without a doubt.
Okay, so on the question of like specific hiring a felon, not to get into any specific incidents.
I knew that would open a conversation.
No, but I mean, again, the book is building a business on core values. So how do your core values factor into those kinds of decisions and other decisions that you face on a daily basis?
Great question. So thanks for that, and thanks for the lead into the book, by the way. We find that core values are very important to our business. They're not things that are up on the wall just because it looks good on the wall. I have made it a specific target to my team that we will hire to our core values. We will manage to our core values. We will reward and recognize to our core values. And let me give you a few examples. One of our core values is teamwork. Now, teamwork is one of those things that, everyone should work as a team, and you throw it up on a wall and you don't really do anything to that, right? So one of the things I want to see from a candidate looking at a job is, how often have you worked on teams? How successful were those teams? How did you manage those teams? Because the problem with a manager on a team is if they're micromanaging and all the work flows through them, now you have a backup. So I might ask probing questions on an interview to make sure I'm getting a team player. Once they're on board, my quarterly review process, one of the things we're looking for is, what do your teammates feel about working with you? How do you work on a team? Are you progressing the initiatives? Are they moving forward as planned? And if you're not, I'm now going to manage you towards that core value, right? I'm sitting with you quarterly telling you, hey, 3 out of the 5 members of your team are frustrated. We need to figure this out because optically you don't look like a team player. I may have to remove you from the position if ultimately you're not a team player, as an example. So we'll manage to that. We will reward and recognize. If Patsy was an employee of mine and she put together a group and that group solved one of our problems at work, I'm going to reward and recognize that specifically because it was teamwork that solved it. So I'm going to use that core value to provide her a reward or a recognition. So I believe that if you come up with the right core values and people can feel them and they're working with them, that it permeates into the culture of your company. It tears down the silos that people work in. People ask for more communication. Well, wait a minute, we're supposed to be working in teams and I don't know what marketing is doing. That's a very fair answer. That's a good gripe, right? You want your salespeople to know what marketing is doing and vice versa. So they have to communicate. And if they're not, then we have a communication issue or a teamwork issue. Integrity, do the right thing, right? Doing the right thing. A specific example, I had an employee that used to stay 3 nights a week. The UPS pickup was at 5:45. We close at 5. 3 nights a week, she asked if her hours could be 8:45 to 5:45 because she wanted to make sure that her packages that left this company made it on that UPS pickup 3 days a week. Fantastic. Now, in the corporate mold of, well, our hours are 8 to 5, we can't change that. That's a shame. We said, fantastic. Come in at 8:45, get yourself your late coffee, work to 5:45. You have now solved a small problem or offered better service to our customers. And I was flexible enough to say, you bet, change the hours for you because we're solving a problem.
Yeah.
She was rewarded and recognized for that because she went over and above, right? She cared about delivering to the customer. And other people saw that. And it wasn't about the reward and it wasn't about the recognition, which never hurts anyway. But it sent a message to the company that our core values matter. And so that's how we tie the core values in, as opposed to just leaving them on the wall. We try to live them and breathe them. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Most of you know, I'll give you another one, integrity and doing the right thing. What happens when you have a really large salesperson who walks the line of what's appropriate, right? They're one of your best salespeople. You need the revenue, but they maybe not. We had some salespeople that used to call in and talk very poorly to our staff. It's a very big decision to make. You're going to tell revenue you can't do business with you unless you speak nicely to my employees. Or do you tell your employees, suck it up, these are really important people to us? That's a fine line. And for some companies, the answer might be, suck it up. Those are our revenue generators.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's for a lot of companies.
In our company, we said you can't do business if you're going to talk to our people that way.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That was just the way it triggered me. But those are the decisions where your core values matter. And if your core values are, for example, that people will treat everyone with respect, and then you allow salespeople not to treat you with respect, you need to take that core value off the wall.
Exactly right.
Bingo.
Well, unfortunately, people don't stop at judging that core value. They begin to wash them all with the same, right? They're all, I mean, our core values are a joke. That becomes part of the message that cascades down into the organization.
And that's probably a real life, very good example of where that can start to fall apart.
Yeah.
We answer our phones live at Brokers International. We have 2 front desk receptionists because we want to answer every phone call live. And one of my favorite things is to sit on the phone, and the first thing I hear is, your phone call is important to us, but you're going to sit on hold for the next 18 minutes. Well, it can't really be that important to them because I'm on hold for 18 minutes. So just don't say it. Just say, hey, due to high call volume, your call is going to be 18 minutes. Because if you really cared about, right? So that's one of those things where if you're going to say it, if you're going to post it on a wall, then you have to deliver, because now people aren't going to trust anything else. So much to your point, Patrick, I agree. And there are times that you have to make some pretty big decisions as to what's more important. And that can be very, very, back to frustration. That can be a very frustrating situation. You bet.
Patsy, I know you have questions.
I'm actually doing pretty good at the moment.
Okay. All right. I just always want to make sure that we're leaving space. Patsy has the unfortunate task of hosting a podcast with 2 extroverts. All right, Mark, I want to ask a personal question.
Sure, you bet.
Between blogging, podcasting, video, I've seen a lot of your content. a lot about leadership. And in several of those, you referenced your dad. You talk about him a lot as I don't remember actually if I've heard you say he was a big influence, but just the fact that you continually reference him, clearly a big influence. What did you learn from your dad about leadership?
I will say, and I would say this with him in the room, both good and bad.
Okay.
My father is a salesperson and has been a salesperson my entire life. Financial services, actually, so the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
Oh, interesting.
My father's so a very big influence on my life. He's a very opinionated person. I got that from him. If you ask me a question, I'm going to give you the answer because you're asking for a reason. So if Patrick, you bought a new shirt and you wore it today and you said, hey, what do you think of my shirt? If I don't like it, I'm going to say, hey, maybe you should try yellow instead of red. Or stripes should be horizontal versus vertical. But you're asking me for a reason, so I'm going to give it. So that was important to me. But my father is also so opinionated that he is very difficult to sway even when he's wrong. I learned the reverse of that. So it's very good to be opinionated. It's good to have an opinion, but you also have to be open-minded and willing to change that opinion. And as I get older, more things change for me than I used to be really stuck in my ways. I'm finding myself more fluid as I get older. My perspective changes a lot. So that two of the best lessons, I don't want to say two, there's a bunch of good lessons. My father knew when to make someone laugh. And this is going to sound very odd, and hopefully people understand this in the context in which I mean it. My father could be at a funeral and know the right time to say something funny. He understood levity in situations, right? He also understood that sometimes if you don't laugh, you're going to cry. And that's important. So that's probably a great lesson I learned, that sometimes laughing at ourselves is the best medicine, right? It breaks the ice for other people. It makes you feel better. That was important. He's a voracious reader. And so is my mom, actually. And so I got the grace of learning and wanting to read. I have a desire to read, and I read a lot. Follow some of your passions. My father's very passionate. He's a true Renaissance man. He's a musician. He's an artist. He likes to write. Like, he does a lot of things. I wish I was as talented in those respects as him. But always follow a passion, right? So if you got an interest, go deep. He taught himself how to program a computer, and then he taught himself a new instrument, or he would try painting, and he tried to write a book. And I'll give him credit. He tried a whole bunch of stuff. I learned a lot of that. And probably the best thing is don't be afraid to meet people. One of the things I pride myself the most in, I walk into a room of 100 people that I don't know. I'll walk out knowing 85 or 90 of them. Not well, but I'll know them and they'll know me. And that has really helped me in my career. So yes, he has been a very big influence. Both I would submit both positive and negative, but the negative has been valuable as well. So thanks for asking. Yeah, you bet.
Great. Yeah.
That's a great answer.
He is kind of a pain in my rear end, though, by the way, now at 80. I will say that. So as much as I love him, he can call me with the craziest, weirdest stuff, and it drives me nuts.
It's great. Well, Leb, so I want to open it up. Any last questions for Mark before we switch gears into today's Let's Get Practical?
Okay, I have one.
Yeah, go for it.
Mark, if you look back through the entire year of 2020, there's two parts to this question. One is, you know what a mulligan is if you play golf.
You bet.
Right? A mulligan, a redo. Is there something you look back and say, man, I wish I could take another swing at that one? And the other part of the question, which you may or may not address, is was there any moment in the midst of these last 14 months where you said, I don't know if I can do this?
Yeah. So let me answer the last one first, because that's the easier one that came to mind first. I am a very outgoing, as probably people can tell from the podcast, I'm a very outgoing person. I love to be around people. And I'm also a traveler. So for the past 25 years, I have traveled probably 35 to 45 weeks of the year, every single year. So for me to be at home for 6 and 7 and 8 months, I got to June and July of last year, and I was climbing the walls. I was not a nice guy to my wife, to my kids. I was at the point where I'm not sure I can do this. This was the longest amount of time I'd ever spent at home in probably 25 years. So yes, there was I don't want to call it a breaking point, but it had been very difficult for me. Not being around people. I'm a guy that can go sit at a bar and have dinner and just talk to people. That's a fun evening for me. Not having any exposure other than the 3 people that are under my roof and an occasional neighbor that I wave to from the window or from the porch was incredibly isolating for me. Back to some of your questions. I just longed to go outside and walk my dog and wave and talk to my neighbors, just to have some interaction. And that's actually what got me through it. Was I live in a wonderful community where people were very friendly and we talked across the street to each other. But there was a time that it was just very frustrating for me. So that's that. The mulligan, several things probably, but I would have prepared for this better had I known it was coming, right? So we only had about 15 or 20 employees out of 125 that had laptops that could work from home. We had a business continuation plan, but everyone has that. And it's kind of the thing that, well, that'll never happen, or maybe it'll happen, but who knows? Well, this happened, right? And we were not prepared. And I'm a prepared guy. I prepare for things and the mulligan would be, our disaster recovery plan needs to be relooked at every single year, and we have to prepare for the worst. And now we have a new worst, right? Before it was a tornado or whatever. Now the new worst is, what if this happens again? So I wish I could go back in time to December of 19 even, or January of 20, and say, what is our plan? That's number one. Some of the things that we put in place early on, for our employees, metrics about outbound calls when you're at home, they were knee-jerk reactions to making sure people were working. Right. And if I look in retrospect, we should have had a little more trust in our employees. And this is me being brutally honest, right? So the first thing I think of is, they're all going to go home. How do we make sure that they're doing the work they need to do? What metrics can we track from home to make sure people are doing the work? And unfortunately, I should have taken the stance of, people will do the work, because I believe our people will do the work. Right. And so we rushed to put in metrics that some of them didn't make any sense. Some of them were extra taxing and probably caused a little undue stress on our employees. And this was one of those where I should have reached out a little bit closer and said, is there another alternative for just us tracking talk time on a phone, for example, that might capture, that might feel a little more trustworthy to our employees, the optics of that. So those are probably two specific examples that I could think of, that if I could have brought them back, redone my mulligan, I would have done there.
I really appreciate that. I love that you just shared that, because we were in the position with some of the organizations and the CEOs, leaders we were working with, having to rewrite COVID-19 updates.
Yep.
And in the beginning, the first wave of them were fear-based.
Yep, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And there was this great concern, understandable, that people were going to go home and nobody's going to get any work done. Yeah. And from the employee's position, it's like, we got to do everything we can. Yeah. To keep this going. This is something I care about. This is my livelihood, and all the other things that you've already embedded in your culture. But I totally get that. I think that was brilliant to share that.
Thank you. And the fear from a CEO's perspective, sometimes it isn't even trust, but the optics of it looks that way. Right. So the last thing I want is a reduction in revenue. No business owner or someone that runs a business wants a reduction in revenue, right? But some of the reasons I don't want a reduction in revenue is I support 125 people here and families that rely on that job. And a reduction in revenue could possibly cause us to have to reduce staff. Right. So the initial reaction isn't necessarily sometimes that I don't trust my employee. It's that I don't want to have a reduction in revenue that I would have to make cuts I would feel sorry about later. Absolutely. So the knee-jerk reaction is make sure they're working. Well, they're gonna work. They want to work. Right. It would have been much smarter for me to come back and say, prior to letting everyone go home, is, hey, one of my biggest concerns is that we don't keep up productivity. And if we don't keep up productivity, we may have to reduce staff. And that's the last thing I want. And if I had set it up that way, the message is delivered and received 180 degrees different than, you better be on the phone and you better be doing the productivity. And those two things are, the message is the same, they're delivered entirely differently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a very, people have to be cautious of that. And I am cautious of that, and probably to my fault, because I speak so quickly and directly, oftentimes I have to rethink how I say things.
Yeah. Yeah. Set the context.
You bet.
Frame.
You
Right.
bet.
That's great.
Great. Yep.
Patsy, any last questions for you before we jump into the let's get practical?
Nope. Let's head
Yeah.
in there.
All right. So this is the point in every episode where we try to give you, the listener, a list of insights, specific things that you can do beginning today, tomorrow in your business, in your organization, to alleviate some of your frustrations. So I'll share what I've captured from our conversation, and I will ask each of my esteemed colleagues and Mark, our guest, help me add to anything that I've missed, please, that you think is something that one of our listeners can just implement. How do we, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So here's what I heard, right? And these are from different points of the conversation. First and foremost, as a leader, be willing to be flexible to stay competitive. And sometimes that may mean shedding some of that old school thinking, some of those beliefs. Be willing to challenge that and be flexible in order to stay competitive in a rapidly changing environment. Number two, remember to include your employees when you're gathering the voice of the customer. I thought that was insightful, right? That typically, I think if we ask a CEO who is the voice of or who is the customer, most of them think externally. And I thought it was a brilliant insight to remind us to include our own employees think of them as customers when we're gathering that data. Number three, as a leader, allow yourself the ability to change your mind. Make decisions, give it a try, and then be willing to call an audible. Again, you had some great insights there, Mark. Number four, take care of yourself first. Mark, for you, that's walks, but whatever it is, take care of yourself. That self-care is important. And then make sure that you're providing avenues of fun for your employees or outlets for them so that they're also taking care of themselves. It just leads to the overall health of the organization. Number five, be transparent in your communications and acknowledge that you hear your employees, which means they may need to understand your rationale behind the decisions that you're making, right? We hear you. This is why we're making the decision that we're making. And don't be afraid to be transparent in that communication to bring your employees along. Number six, be proactive and be willing to put extra dollars and creative thinking to improve your diversity and inclusion. You talked about that, Mark, having to get creative. I was even thinking then later in the conversation, you were talking about how this virtual world that we now live in opens up the avenues for you to hire from outside of your own community. That may be one way that you or that a listener can improve the diversity and inclusion in their own organization just by hiring outside of where you might normally have hired. Number seven, in terms of right people, right seats, be clear first on the accountabilities of the role that you're hiring into. And then ask the question, once I'm clear on that, where can I find this person? And be willing to give yourself permission to have different molds for each position, right? Sometimes a sales position may look very different from a finance position, and that's okay. Number eight, and I know this is, we got to it late, but Mark, I know this is really important to you, and that's manage to the core values. Hire to them. Hold your employees accountable to the expectations. Live and lead them yourself as leaders, and coach your people up to those expectations. I think you said it, if you're going to say it, if you're going to post it, then if you're going to post them on the wall, then you better be willing and ready to live them. Number nine, and this came out of Mark when you were speaking about your father, just the power of levity and humor, and be willing to laugh at yourself just to diffuse some of the stress and the anxiety that exists in the workplace. And then the last one, just as you were speaking eloquently, Mark, trust your people, even when you can't see them. Just trust them and communicate in a way that conveys to them, we're in this together. I trust you, as opposed to, hey, it's that fear-based leadership approach. So those were the 10, and there were more. I tried to limit it to 10. So Mark,
I should write a new book. I should write a new book.
You should.
Right. 10 lessons
Patrick's
from
got the
podcast.
outline.
But I open it up to my peers and to you, Mark. What in terms of let's get practical, what someone can do immediately to begin addressing some of these frustrations in their own organization. What did I miss?
There's one I would add, which is work-life balance.
Great.
That things happen in our lives,
Yeah.
our lives personally and in our employees' lives. Again, be flexible. So there's a theme here, and bring some compassion to it.
Mhm. That's good. Yeah, I was going to say, so, ask for a redo now and then. And I think it ties to something that, Mark, we talked about once before is, welcome mistakes.
I was just writing that one down. You took it from my pen. Nice work.
I'll give it back to you. I think another thing that I hear you saying is in times of change, rather than hunker down, over communicate.
You bet.
The necessity for communication is there. Acknowledge and reward innovation. I mean, in a sense, that the person who was saying, I want to change my work schedule for a good purpose that serves this organization, and you acknowledged and rewarded that person for that. Those were a few. Patrick, you got so many. You got so many others. I think I'll share and turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, Mark, hit the mistakes.
Yeah, so I've got a couple things. So there is a quote on my wall: "If you're not making mistakes, you're not working." I'm a big believer in you've got to allow people to make mistakes. What you just hope doesn't happen is you make the same mistakes over and over and over, right? That we can't stand for. But again, it's if you're not taking swings, you're not going to hit the ball, and not every time you'll hit the ball, right? And so you have to allow your customers the ability, based on what their role is to make some mistakes. So I think that's an important one. Leb, 99% of all situations occur because of poor communication. I 100% believe that. I will tell you that I believe human nature is set on expectations, and we're only truly frustrated. So back to the podcast, when your expectation isn't met. And the best example I can give you is when you drop your clothes off at the dry cleaner and they tell you they'll be ready on Wednesday, and you show up on Wednesday and they're not ready. And they say, well, we had a problem. Could you come back Friday? Now you're a little miffed. But had they told you on Monday that, hey, this week we're doing some work and it might be Friday, just show up on Friday, you would be fine with that. Mm-hmm. And I find that 99% of the issues that I run into, both personally and professionally, is that I set an expectation, whether it was given to me or not. I set it anyway, and then I'm disappointed in my expectation. So I think that's communicate and make sure you're not setting extra expectations. And the last one, which I think is probably the most important for me with my employees, I am invested in their success. But the important thing is their definition of success, not mine. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean by that? I have a lot of employees that this is their job, not their career. They want to they don't live to work, they work to live. And we have many employees that want to do an honest, hard day's work and go home. And they don't want to climb the ladder, and they don't want to run a company, and they don't need zillions of dollars. They want a very nice place to work where they're treated fairly and they're compensated fairly, and they want to go home. And if that's your definition of success, I'm invested in giving that to you. If you're my employee and you want to run this company one day, and that might not happen in my four walls, I'm going to help you leave us and go somewhere else, because I'm invested in what you want to have. And if I'm invested in your success and I do as much as I can to help you succeed, I believe I get where I want to go. Yep. If I help you get where you want to go, I believe you'll get where you want to go. And I will tell you that's probably the best lesson for me. I do that with my friends. We do that with our friends and our family. Why wouldn't you do that with your employees? And that doesn't mean you can keep them all the time, but no one will ever say anything bad about you if you're helping them get where they need to go. And so I think that's probably a very important lesson for, I think, others to know. People know when you're invested in their success. And it does permeate a culture. So that gives us, I think, 15 or 16.
Yeah,
I think we knocked it out of the park.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, that's, I mean, that hour flew by, honestly, but that is, we've come to the end of this episode of The Frustrated CEO. Mark Williams of Brokers International. I just want to thank you for stopping by, for sharing your insights, your wisdom with us today. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much, Leb, Patsy, Patrick. Obviously, great to work with you. Super fun. Loved this. Hopefully, we'll get tons of people to listen to it and lots of press and conversation. So, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, that would be great. So,
Thanks.
to our listener, you can learn more about Brokers International at biltd.com. And if you want to learn more about Mark, check out markwwilliams.com, where you can actually book Mark to speak, or you can pick up a copy of his book, Lead, Don't Manage, 12 Lessons in Creating a Leadership Culture Based on Core Values. You can also find that on amazon.com. And after you're done buying Mark's book, head over to thefrustratedceo.com to download today's Let's Get Practical, as well as find all of our previous episodes of the show. Leb and Patsy, as always, you guys are fantastic partners. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yep. And finally, we thank you, listener, for spending time with us today. We will see you next time.